Okay guys, welcome back to the next video in this mini-series. This time we're going to be creating the HTML JavaScript file that we will launch in Apache Tomcat Server that's going to serve as the front end of this chat application. So just a quick recap, if you remember previous videos, we actually created the Keycloak, or to say the client ID for the chat app in Keycloak, so the user will authenticate against, because we don't want any user just to be accessing your chat app, right? They have to be a user of your system, so that's why we have that. We also created a database backend and the actual table where we're going to be using to store these messages. So now let's go ahead and get started with creating the HTML and JavaScript file to serve as the front end. And once again, let's go ahead and do a quick demo of the chat application so we know what we're working towards. Okay guys, here's going to be the chat example that I have. I do have two browsers open where we're going to log into each one as a different user, and we're going to just start posting messages and see how the chat feature works. So you can see here I logged in as test user, but the actual user's name is John Smith, and then this other one is test user 2, and you're going to see here after logging in that the name is Adam Tarley. So you can see in the top there is a message box where you can post your message as part of the chat, and then there is the post message button, and then there is a text box area where you'll see the chat history so you can see exactly who's typing what. So if I type here ABC on the John Smith browser, you'll see that it's going to be showing up in the message box in both. And as part of the chat, I do post the username of each message there, so you can see exactly who wrote what message every single time something is posted. So I'm just going to do a couple more messages here back and forth, so you can see it being reflected in the text box. So you can see how it's working right now. So things look good, and you can see again the username associated to each message and each message being displayed. So let's just go ahead and log out for now. Okay, so the great thing is that I have the code already created that I'll just be copying and pasting so you guys can see instead of me going, typing line by line. But I will try to explain them as much as I can so everything makes sense. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay guys, let's go ahead and get started with creating the HTML JavaScript code. So go to a folder path where you want to put this and just create an index.html. And for now, we're just going to go ahead and create these basic tags. And let's go ahead and save this. And let's go ahead and open this in an IDE. You can open it in the IDE of your choice, but I'm going to do this here in NetBeans, just easier to update. And here we go. So right now the first thing I'm going to do here, and I'm just going to copy and paste it, is I'm going to copy these div IDs, and this is something I copied from another file that I already have with this code. Essentially, there's nothing here special other than the fact that these will be replaced by other code that I'm going to create. So this is going to contain dynamically created HTML, which is going to show like user information after they log in, and it's going to show the actual form where the user will post their messages in the chat and actually be able to see the message history. Now if we go above here, let's go ahead and create a couple of script sections, and just allow me to type this first and then I'll explain what it is. Okay, this first script here, I'm basically loading a Keycloak JavaScript file, which if you look here at my folder, you can see that relative to the index.html, I do have a lib folder, a Keycloak JS adapter distribution, and then a version. And if you look inside here, I do have the Keycloak JavaScript file. And this is important because this is going to allow us to invoke code that's going to allow us to interface with Keycloak for user authentication and for extracting user information. And where you can find this file is if you actually go to the Keycloak website and you go to the downloads folder or downloads page, you can see that there is a section called client adapters, and there is a JavaScript entry here where you can download it using npm, zip, or tar.gz. So download it however you prefer, extract the contents, and then you can reference it in your index.html. So that's what that is right there. Now the next section I'm going to do here is something just very basic, not really related to the script function or to say the chat feature, but just something I want to do, and you're going to see here in a minute. Okay guys, so as you can see from the comment and from the code, it's pretty simple. I am invoking a timer that's going to be called every second, which will then call the function update time, which as you can see here basically creates a new date object, and we're going to update a div with the local time string. So you can see here this document get element by ID. It's going to grab this div time placeholder and update the contents with this. So as a quick demonstration of this, let's go ahead and go into our Apache server. And so what we're going to do, if you saw my previous videos, we're going to do basically select the context path for this, and you got to point the world directory path to the folder where you have this index.html. So if we go here one second, and let me just kind of minimize this, you'll see that the folder where I have the index.html is that home Chris documents chat application, and then this folder, and you can see that corresponds to this path here. So everything looks good, and let's click deploy. Okay, it got successfully deployed. So if I go ahead and right click and open this chat, you'll see that it's displaying the updated time every single second, and that's as expected, because you can see here the set interval is calling update time every second. So things are looking good so far. Now the next thing I want to do is let's go ahead and update this body tag, because once the page tries to get loaded up, we are going to call a specific function. This function does not exist just yet, but we will have it. And essentially, from the name of it, you can tell, we're going to create a function that's going to force the user to authenticate against Keycloak, and this function is going to initialize some Keycloak variables that we need to do just that. So let's go ahead and create another script section here. And let's do a few things. Okay, first let me just go ahead and copy paste this again from the other call I have. So this new script section, I'm going to do another set interval, which is going to call this get last messages every 2 seconds. This function does not yet exist, but I will show you that in a little bit. And then you can see here I do have some variables for some app URL endpoints, which is going to be useful because this is going to help us interact with different applications for authentication. And for example, Keycloak for authenticating, we're going to have endpoints for the Java web application, which is going to be where we send requests to get information from the database or to post messages from the database. So as you can see here, this var Apache client endpoint has a value chat, and this is going to correlate to the context path that we set our application. So you can see here we have /chat. This is what that variable is referring to. Next, we have a Keycloak based URL, which is going to be referencing the HTTP localhost 8081 auth. And if you look at our Keycloak page, you can see that the base URL path is exactly that, localhost 8081 auth. Next, we have an Apache Tomcat Server base URL, which the base URL path is localhost 8080. So if we go to this manager page where we created the context path for this chat, you can see directly here in the URL it is localhost 8080. Now this variable here is in reference to something that doesn't yet exist. We're going to see this in the next video, but this is going to be this chat web application is going to be the name of the Java application that's going to receive these requests to post messages to the database or to get the latest chat messages to show to the user. And then this current app URL is essentially the full domain path, or to say the full URL path for this chat application. So you can see here it's going to reference Apache Tomcat Server base URL, which is localhost 8080. It has a / at the end, and then chat, which is the context path for this application. So far it's looking good. Now let's go ahead and create a couple of user variables, or should I say variable that we will use to get user information. And these two variables are going to basically contain the unique user ID that's stored in Keycloak for this particular user. And the username is going to contain, as you guessed it, the user's username that is stored within Keycloak. So let me go ahead and just add a comment to this. Okay, so that's good. Now we're going to go ahead and create this other variable here, which is messages from DB, and essentially this is going to contain the list of the chat history to display to the user interface. Okay, great. So now let me go ahead and paste in the code for the initialize Keycloak function here. So I just pasted quite a bit, and I'm going to show you exactly what's happening here. So this initialize Keycloak or init Keycloak, the first thing it's going to do is create a new Keycloak variable, which is going to have the endpoint for Keycloak, the realm, and the client that it's trying to connect to. So once again, the Keycloak base URL is localhost 8081 auth. And if we go here to the Keycloak admin console, you can see again this is localhost 8081 auth. And now we're also trying to connect or authenticate against the chat app within the realm 1 realm. And you can see here I am within realm 1, and within our clients we do have a chat app. So you can see how this is set up in the part 1 video of this mini series, but I'll just kind of scroll over this briefly to show you exactly what it is, what I have inputted here. So now if we go back to the code, that defines that variable, and then this Keycloak init basically forces the user to get authenticated. So assuming the user types in their credentials correctly, what's going to happen is we're going to call this generate logged in HTML function, which if we see over here, it's going to update two div IDs, with one of them is going to say the logged in, you're logged in essentially, and then the second one is going to be a logout link, because we have to allow the users who log into the app to also log out. So you can see here that this is the code to do the logout link, and if we scroll down, we're going to see this logged in placeholder and logged out placeholder as div IDs. So here's the logged in placeholder and the logout. So those are going to be updated with this dynamic HTML. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do another Keycloak function call called load user info, and here's how we're going to retrieve user information from the Keycloak database or the Keycloak application. So once we invoke this, we're actually going to extract the sub field, and this is going to contain the unique ID for the user, and then we're going to extract the user's username. So once again, these are going to be used for posting the messages into the database and for retrieving it for showing chat history, because not only do you want to see the messages, you want to see who they came from. So next thing we have here is we have generate user info HTML function call, where we pass in a name and an email, and this is simply going to update a div or an ID with display user info placeholder as the name, and it's going to say welcome within a header 1 tag, your email is, and then display the user's email. And you can see that display user info placeholder down below here in the body section. This is going to be updated with that once we get a successful return from Keycloak. Now the last function that's going to be called here is generate message section HTML, and this is probably the most important one, because this is going to generate the fields for the user to enter a chat message and to show the chat history. So you can see here we are creating a label called message box. We are creating an input field where here's where the user is going to type in their messages to post. We have this input field where the user is going to actually click on to submit the message, and it's going to invoke a submit message JavaScript call, which doesn't exist just yet, but I will show you in a moment. And then it's going to show a text area field where this is where it's going to display the chat history. So let me go ahead and get the next piece of code. Okay, here I'm pasting the submit message function, which again is going to be invoked whenever we hit submit. This is going to take the user input from the message box and send it to the servlet on the Apache Tomcat server, and that server is going to store this message into the database. So you can see here we are creating this URL endpoint, and this is going to contain the endpoint of the Java web application that we didn't create just yet. That will be in the next video. The next thing we're doing is extracting what the user typed in from the message box, and you can see that this message box is generated within this function. And you can see here, this is what the user will type, and this is what will be sent whenever the user clicks on post message. And then here we're doing a guard check to make sure that that isn't blank. If it is, we are going to return. If it actually contains data, we're going to continue on. Here we're creating a form data object where we're going to be sending 3 pieces of information: the user's ID, the user's name, and the user message. So if you recall, these two were fulfilled when we get the user information back from Keycloak, and then we're going to be, of course, sending the user message that they want to post. Here we're creating, HTTP objects to send a post request, which is going to contain the data, as you can see here in the xhr.send. This is going to contain the ID, name, and message to be sent. And this onload function is going to handle the response from the Java web application, which is just going to display whatever the web application displays or returns. And then we're going to go ahead and clear the message box field so the user can type in something else if he wants. Now for the last method, I'm going to go ahead and just start typing it myself. We are going to create the getLastMessages function. And if you recall, this is actually what's in the second timer that we created. Every 2 seconds, we are calling this getLastMessages, which is going to get the last few messages from the database to show in the chat history. So let me go ahead and just create a simple comment to indicate such. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is once again create the URL endpoint. And again, this is going to contain the endpoint for the Java web application that doesn't exist yet, but it will. And now let's go ahead and create the variables to submit the GET request. Okay, so this is the code to actually submit the GET request. And here in this onload function, we're going to go ahead and handle the data returned. So as you can see here, we're going to do a JSON parse on the methods returned because it's going to be sent, and you're going to see in the next video, it's going to be sent as a JSON, and we're going to assign it to this array or this local variable. So let me just add a comment indicating so. And now let's extract the fields within it so we can display it on the user's chat area. So we're going to iterate over this because since this is a JSON array, well, it's going to be an array, but it can contain one object or one message, 2 messages. It depends on how we construct the SQL query to see how much we want to return back. So we're going to go ahead and update this variable to handle or parse out the data. Okay, so you can see this first line is going to extract the username and the ID from the message back from the web application. And I'm going to do a new line where I then display the message. And then simply I'm going to create this line separator, which is going to separate each chat from in the chat history box. After this for loop, we're going to go ahead and actually update that text area here. So you can see here it's going to update an element with the ID called groupbox with this formatted content. And you can see here this groupbox is actually one of those fields dynamically created in this function. You can see this text area has the ID groupbox. So that's what we're going to do. And that looks like it's about it. So let's go ahead and do a quick demo to see how this looks like. Let me go ahead and undeploy the chat so we can upload the new HTML file. So we're going to have the same context path, and we're going to reference again the folder where this file lives. Okay, looks okay so far. Let's open it up. Once again, it's going to ask for our username. So this is just a test user I created, but you can see how the actual name, first name, last name, and it is just this, John Smith. Your email is, and then you can see the form here. So this is neat because if you look over here, you can see how the functions and the JavaScript code here are actually creating these dynamically. So if we go back up here, you can see that the generate logged in HTML is creating or displaying the logged in text and the logout link. You can see here's the logged in text and here's the logout link that we can actually click. You can see as well we have this generate user info HTML, which is actually displaying a welcome username. Your email is such, and you can see that over here, welcome user's name, your email is this. And then we have this other generate message section HTML, which is actually creating the label, the field for it to type in the message to post in the chat, the post message button, and the text area, which you see over here. So now something interesting, just as an FYI, if you right click and select inspect, most browsers should have something like this, but if you open up the console window, you'll notice a bunch of these errors indicating like 404. And basically what that means is we're trying to make a request to an endpoint that doesn't exist yet. You see how it's trying to call chat web application get latest messages, which correlates to these variables here, chat web application, and then we have another function here which uses that plus the get latest messages. Since this endpoint doesn't exist, and it will in the next video, every single 2 seconds that this message is called, we're going to get this error. And so the same thing is going to be true if we try to post a message. We should see an error. So if I go ahead and just type in something like hello world, we're not going to see anything show up in the chat. And if you scroll down, you'll see that it's trying to do the post message, which once again doesn't exist just yet, so we get the 404 response. And yeah, so that's it for now, guys. I mean, this is looking okay. This was nothing fancy with like CSS. I just kind of wanted to show you the functionality of how to get, a simple chat application working. But as a final test here, we can go ahead and test this logout link that we created, and you can see we are now back into the login screen, at which point the user once again can enter their password to log back in, and now we're back in. So that's it. So that concludes this video, guys. So just to recap, part 1 of the video, the previous video that I did, basically talks about creating the client ID for this new chat app in Keycloak. I also created the database and the table required for these messages to work in this chat application. That hasn't really been exercised in this video because the application that will interface to the database is the Java web app, which doesn't exist yet, but it will. So we'll see that in the next video. But here I wanted to show just a basic HTML JavaScript to kind of have a chat application working, and that's what we did. So I appreciate you guys actually coming here to watch this video. Thank you so much for watching. I do have other social media accounts on Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon, so if you can show any support on any of those, that would be greatly appreciated. And that's about it. So if you guys found this useful, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. See you soon.